Under the shadow of Genghis Khan, life in the Mongol Empire was not ordinary. Imagine a world where mistakes were punished severely, and where war was a constant. In this world, peace was only an illusion, a fleeting dream for those living in it. The Mongol Empire, which spanned vast lands from the Pacific Ocean to Eastern Europe, was held together by an unyielding set of laws known as the Yassa. These laws governed everything from theft to personal relationships, leaving little room for leniency or compassion. Genghis Khan's rule was defined by an uncompromising demand for loyalty and discipline, where even minor mistakes led to brutal consequences. The Yassa was not just a law but a way of life in the Mongol Empire. It was a set of laws that was strict, harsh, and meant to create fear and obedience. The Yassa dictated that even the smallest theft was punishable by death. Imagine that a neighbor's animal was taken without permission. The punishment for such an act was execution. Adultery, which today might be met with societal disdain, was treated with equal severity. Offenders were often executed or exiled with no chance for defense or appeal. The Yassa left no room for mistakes and no opportunity for exceptions, not even for the friends or family of Genghis Khan himself. Loyalty to the great Khan was above all else, and the laws of the empire were absolute. Genghis Khan's vision of absolute obedience ensured that the empire remained united under his rule, but it came at the cost of individual freedom. According to the historian Giovanni, who wrote extensively on the Mongol Empire, Genghis Khan believed that a united and disciplined empire required absolute obedience. The Yassa was not meant to be a set of reasonable laws. Rather, it was meant to instill fear. It was meant to inspire awe in the people and force them to obey without question. For the average Mongol, the Yassa loomed like a constant shadow. Every action, every choice, was under the threat of punishment. Life was about survival, and the key to survival was complete submission to the laws of the Khan. Under these strict laws, survival meant obedience. The Yassa was designed to maintain order, but it also stripped people of personal autonomy. It didn't allow for individual exceptions, and anyone who dared defy the laws, no matter how small the infraction, would face punishment. Genghis Khan's empire was vast and diverse, yet the Yassa applied to all, uniting the Mongol Empire in a rigid structure that left no room for personal freedom. It was a world where any misstep could lead to a harsh punishment, often death. The fear of punishment was the force that kept the empire running, and the law was the sword that kept people in line. Living under Genghis Khan's rule was like living under constant surveillance. There was no room for error, and people lived in a constant state of fear. A wrong word or a misstep in behavior could result in death, exile, or worse. The empire's laws were unforgiving, and the punishment was often swift and severe. This left little room for personal expression or freedom of choice. People's lives were dictated by the unyielding authority of the Khan, and their survival depended on their willingness to follow the law without question. For the common Mongol, life was a struggle not just against the environment, but against the weight of the law. The vast steppes of Central Asia were unforgiving, and the harsh weather conditions made life difficult. Summers were scorching, and winters could be brutal. The nomadic Mongols lived in felt tents called gairs, which were easily portable and provided some protection from the elements. They relied heavily on their livestock for food and resources, and their survival depended on moving frequently in search of water and grazing lands. There were few luxuries in life, and basic necessities were hard to come by. Water was a precious commodity, and even food had to be carefully preserved due to the nomadic lifestyle. This harsh way of life was not chosen out of preference, but out of necessity. The Mongols' survival depended on their ability to adapt to the land and make the most of the limited resources available. Women and children played a significant role in the daily life of the Mongols. They worked alongside the men, managing the animals, foraging for food, and setting up the mobile homes for the next journey. While the elite may have enjoyed wealth from the spoils of conquest, the average Mongol faced daily struggles to meet even the basic needs of life. Life on the Mongolian steppes was hard, and there was little room for error. Just the weather or the difficult terrain that made life under Genghis Khan's rule so challenging. The Mongol Empire was a war machine. Conquest was the very foundation of Genghis Khan's empire, and military campaigns were constant. Genghis Khan's army, known for its speed and efficiency, struck fear into the hearts of those who dared oppose the Mongol expansion. The empire grew at an unprecedented rate, reaching from the Pacific to Eastern Europe, and every able-bodied man was expected to contribute to its growth. War was not just a duty but a way of life for the Mongols. Soldiers were expected to be skilled archers and horse riders, able to travel quickly and fight fiercely. The empire's rapid growth was built on the backs of these warriors, and the constant state of war meant that there was no time for peace. The Mongols relied on psychological warfare, using fear and terror to break the spirit of their enemies. Cities that resisted Mongol rule were often completely destroyed, and mass killings were common to instill fear in future enemies. Cities were destroyed, and entire populations were massacred to ensure that the empire's authority was never questioned. In this harsh world, where survival was a matter of obedience, and the slightest mistake could lead to death, the Mongol Empire thrived. Living in Genghis Khan's empire was not a life for the faint-hearted. It was a test of endurance, loyalty, and obedience. Life in the Mongol Empire was unrelenting, not only because of the harsh laws but because of the extreme punishments that awaited those who violated them. However, more severe punishments existed for crimes such as betrayal, theft of imperial property, or even defying Genghis Khan's authority. Offenders could be dismembered or torn apart by wild horses, a public display of retribution meant to deter any thoughts of rebellion. Other gruesome methods described in historical accounts include boiling people alive or impalement, though the exact accuracy of these accounts remains debated. The purpose of such extreme measures was clear: to create an atmosphere of fear where even the thought of rebellion or disobedience would seem impossible. Loyalty was sacred in the Mongol army, and soldiers were expected to be unwavering in their devotion to Genghis Khan. Rather than killing someone outright, the Mongol rulers sometimes chose to destroy a person's wealth, property, or status, leaving them to suffer the indignity of exile. This was particularly effective for the elite, who would be exiled to the harshest parts of the steppe, where survival was nearly impossible. The mental toll of such exile was devastating, as it often left individuals without any form of protection or resources to survive. Survival was about more than just finding food and shelter. It was about ensuring that you remained loyal and obedient to the laws set out by the Khan. The constant threat of war was a part of daily life. For many, war was not just a military duty but a way of life, shaping the culture and identity of the Mongol people. Genghis Khan was not content to simply rule. He sought to expand his empire through constant conquest. The result was an unending series of military campaigns that stretched from Asia to Europe. For the Mongol men, warfare was an expected part of their existence. They were raised to be warriors, trained in horseback riding and archery from a young age. The Mongol military was one of the most formidable forces in history, and its success was largely due to its speed, organization, and brutal tactics. Soldiers were expected to move quickly and strike hard, overwhelming their enemies before they had a chance to retaliate. The Mongols' strategy of warfare was both psychological and physical. They relied on terror as much as they relied on their military might. Cities that resisted Mongol rule were often destroyed, and the survivors were either killed or forced into submission. The famous chronicler Giovanni, described the Mongol army as an unstoppable force, sweeping across the land like a storm. For those who lived in the empire, the threat of war was constant, and people knew that the Mongol army could strike at any moment. For the civilians in the empire, life was shaped by the constant movement of armies. Whole communities could be uprooted to support military campaigns, and villages could be abandoned if they were in the path of a Mongol invasion. The Mongols were known for their swift movements, often catching their enemies off guard. Civilians lived in constant fear of conscription into the army, and families were left in uncertainty as their men went off to war. The psychological toll of living in such a war-driven society was immense. For the conquered peoples, life was even harsher. Genghis Khan's army did not just defeat their enemies. They sought to break their spirit. Psychological warfare played a significant role in the Mongol military campaigns. Cities that resisted Mongol conquest were often destroyed entirely, and mass executions were carried out to instill fear in future enemies. The Mongols did not simply seek to conquer lands. They aimed to create an atmosphere of terror that would make resistance seem impossible. Even those within the empire were affected by the constant warfare. Mongol soldiers lived under immense pressure to succeed in battle, and retreat was not an option. Failure in battle could mean execution, and the toll of constant warfare left many soldiers weary and hardened. But despite these challenges, the Mongol Empire continued to grow, fueled by its insatiable desire for conquest. Living in the Mongol Empire meant enduring a life of constant uncertainty. The laws of the empire were absolute, and any mistake could result in a swift and brutal punishment. The Mongols' constant need for conquest meant that war was always on the horizon, and civilians lived in fear of being conscripted or caught in the crossfire of an invasion. Life under Genghis Khan's rule was not just about surviving. It was about submitting to an unyielding force, where loyalty and obedience were the keys to survival. The empire's brutal laws and relentless warfare shaped the lives of those who lived under Genghis Khan's reign, and the legacy of his rule is still felt today.